Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Luke Taylor.
Thank you very much. Ms Lewell, it is a pleasure to serve under your chairship again. I'd first like to congratulate the Honourable Member for Derby South for securing this debate. Waste management is a huge issue and requires the attention of all of us in this House. We Liberal Democrats are committed to strengthening incentives to reduce both waste and our country's reliance on incinerators. While incineration of residual waste might be the least bad option available to handle our unrecycled and unseparated waste at the moment, it is far from the long-term solution that we need. Let's be absolutely clear. Incinerators are currently an unavoidable solution for many local councils. They are a deeply imperfect solution to a much bigger problem, though. When we get to the point where all of our commercial and domestic waste is avoided, reduced, reused, recycled and composted with no residual waste remaining, then I will be at the front of the march to shut down our energy from waste facilities, for they will have served their purpose. As correctly observed by a number of members already, incineration sits at the very, very bottom of the waste hierarchy. The energy that incinerators produce for local heat networks ideally will have been switched to air source and ground source heat pumps or waste heat from server farms, perhaps, leaving these towering structures finally silent. But we are a long way from that point. Today, well-managed and well-maintained incinerators are an effective and safe method for disposing of our residual waste. I will give
Ben Obsi-Jacty.
Thank the Chair. Could I just clarify that the Liberal Democrats' parliamentary position is that they are pro-incinerators, and can you tell me how many incinerators there are in Liberal Democrat constituencies?
Yeah.
I'm happy to clarify. Incinerations in ERF is the least worst available option for disposing of our residual waste. He referred earlier to the ping-pong of different administrations, different political parties and their approach towards incineration, and his question about where incinerators sit. Well, my constituency, Sutton-on-Cheam, sits next to Carshalton and Wallington. Our borough, Sutton, has an incinerator in Beddington. It was initially given planning permission, as the Honourable Member speaks about, by the local council because of legal advice, but it was called in by a fellow called Boris Johnson. And what political party did he represent? He was a Conservative Mayor of London, and he reviewed the plans and he approved the incinerator in Sutton. As we currently have an incinerator operating in our constituency, as I say, approved by a Conservative London Mayor. I will go on. In the 2022 report, Chief Medical Officer Professor Chris Whitty wrote that the ERF is preferred over the use of landfill due to the opportunity to recover valuable and sustainable power. But they are not all well maintained, they are not all well managed. And we know that eventually we must move beyond them as soon as possible. But we can only do that by speeding up the changes in the whole ecosystem of waste management in this country that would enable their extinction. So let's begin with plastic and packaging. We support the strengthening of incentives to reduce packaging and waste sent to landfill and incineration. In the coalition government, we pioneered the plastic bag levy, which has been exactly the kind of successful societal change that we need. Now, it's almost impossible to remember a time when you were not charged for a plastic bag or gave second thought to your need to take one. The reuse of bags and the growing market for stronger, reusable bags is fully normalised. We don't bat an eyelid. It's akin to the removal of lead from petrol, something that once seemed pervasive and impossible to imagine an alternative for, was phased out entirely in such a way that whole generations have no recollection of it ever being any other way. That didn't happen overnight. It took a mission-driven government to step in and lead the way, incentivising the right kind of behaviour and waste management to light a path forward for society to take. And I accept that it is something that's already happening in some areas, but we need to go further and faster. To meaningfully tackle plastic pollution and waste and get Britain as close as possible to full recycling, we've called for a deposit return scheme for food and drink bottles and containers. We work with the devolved administrations to ensure consistency across the UK, and we must learn lessons from the difficulties with the Scottish scheme. To further reduce residual waste, we've been calling on the government to expedite the complete elimination of non-recyclable single-use plastics within 3 years and their replacement with affordable, reusable, recyclable or compostable alternatives. This would enable us to set an ambition of ending all plastic waste exports by 2030. Separation of plastic waste for reprocessing is critical to reduce the amount of recyclable plastic that is unnecessarily burned in incinerators. We know that peer group pressure and normalisation of behaviour is so critical to that behaviour. And the member's comments remind me of the former leader of the Sutton Conservatives, who told residents recently that most of your recycling goes up the chimney at the local ERF. Claims that are untrue and actually undermine efforts to increase recycling. So if there are efforts to improve recycling and improve our diversion of plastics from incineration, then maybe he can remind his colleagues of the importance to recycle as often as they possibly can. Turning now to food waste. In this age of food banks, according to the company Waste Managed, the UK throws away 9.5 million tonnes of food every year. That's nearly 24 million loaves of bread. In my constituency in Sutton Borough, we've recently had a campaign to improve the participation in recycling of food waste, which targeted about 15,000 households in the borough. This campaign saw an increase of 17% by tonnage of food waste recycling in those areas targeted, and a 10% increase in the number of households participating in the programme. The evidence is clear. Targeted programmes can be effective at improving participation rates and getting food waste down. The former Conservative government failed to take the measures needed to support businesses in becoming more efficient and to support communities in moving beyond the throwaway culture. Many private sector enterprises like Too Good To Go are opening up in this space and doing, frankly, a far better job than the government, which is welcome, but a reminder that there is room for the government to take steps of its own. And the government has to look again at the enormous mistake that is their family farms tax, which will undermine any last vestiges of localism in the food chain that remain in this country. If we don't incentivise local produce being sold to local people through local businesses, we stand no chance of getting our emissions down, minimising food waste and encouraging healthier eating. And we stand no chance of moving beyond incineration. And on air pollution, let's be clear, we don't just have to accept that the way incinerators currently operate has to be the only way in this final phase of their history. A significant amount of the concern around the use and potential misuse of incineration stems from mismanagement and the fact that our regulator, the Environment Agency, is prevented from doing the pervasive monitoring it should be able to do. In my borough of Sutton, the Beddington ERF on occasion exceeds pollution levels set out in its facilities permit. While these breaches are minor and often very short period, often caused by nitrous oxide canisters getting into the waste stream, they are not investigated very often by the Environment Agency. The local council and waste authority lack the powers to compel the operator to address problems in their sorting and filtration systems. We can only move forward towards the managed extinction of this form of waste management and wean ourselves off of incineration altogether if we make sure that existing sites are properly managed and meaningfully regulated. The Liberal Democrats want the UK to be world-leading in efforts to improve air quality. We've called for a £20 billion emergency fund for local authorities to tackle the clean air crisis, as well as a £150 billion green recovery plan. We need to pass a new Clean Air Act based on the World Health Organization guidelines and enforced by a new air quality agency to codify law that nobody should be subject to consistently awful levels of air pollution. Not passing these measures makes a mockery of our already fairly opaque plans for meaningful climate action. We were deeply concerned by the Climate Change Committee's findings in its 7th carbon budget that the UK has deliverable plans for only a third of the emissions reductions needed to meet climate goals. If the government wants to rectify that, they should get a grip with a beefed-up approach to managing waste and dealing with air pollution. There is a lot more we can do to prevent waste going to incineration in the first place and regulate the existing stock of incinerators better. The recent Office for Environmental Protection's progress report noted that waste generation and incineration rates have continued to increase and the recycling rates have stalled. While this is not the case in my borough of Sutton, where we see reductions in tonnage of waste sent to the ERF from residents, elsewhere more effort must be made. We need an active government to set up to the plate to reverse that worrying trend. We must take meaningful action to regulate existing incinerators and also look more closely at proposed new incinerators, such as the one at Camford Magna in the southwest of England, where data suggests there already exists 95% of the required capacity already, as has been commented by members around. We must implement a better food waste strategy, eradicate plastic waste and speed up the energy transition to alternative technologies that would hasten the end of residual waste, which then allows us to move away from incineration, so we can finally consign them to the oblivion of history, sitting in the engineering museums alongside Victorian technology, as a reminder of how important waste reduction is and how critical it is to the top of the waste hierarchy. Thank you.